turned it on. So before we get into some of the teachings of Rumi's poetry, I'm drawing from this book by Andrew Harvey. It's called The Teachings of Rumi. And it starts with this part one section called The Call. It's God calling to our soul to come home. And so, taken from one of Rumi's poems, the Mathnawi, it says to us, go on a journey from lower self to higher self, my friend. Such a journey transforms the earth into a mine of gold. So I thought this really encapsulated a lot of what we want to unpack today, that there is this journey from the lower self to the higher self, from the dross of the ordinary and the unenlightened and unregenerate state of awareness to the royal gold of the alchemical transformation of the higher self. And in that process of transformation from the lower self to the higher self, we're going to see how all of the forces and forms of nature are taken up in this alchemy. That it's paradoxical, especially as we explore in the later teachings of the Sufis, it's paradoxical how we will see that the human being stands at the center of all the forces of nature and in fact has the command over all the forces of nature. Which reminds me of a passage in the Quran where it says that when Adam was created, he was given all of the names of God. And the names of God are the codes, the code structures, the energy signatures that are behind all forces and forms in creation. And Adam, as the Khalifa or the vicegerent of God, is at the center and the commander of all these forces and forms. Paradoxical, because as we currently see ourselves in this unregenerate state of the lower self, we seem to be at the victim level or the effect level of all the forms and forces of the world. But as Rumi's telling us in this opening poem, that when you transform, the earth transforms. As you alchemize into gold, you will see the earth alchemize into gold. They're all interconnected, you and nature. Before we jump fully in, like I was saying, we want to first recognize that the lower self, as much as it would like to, cannot get to that place of the higher self with its own instrumentation, with its own agenda and its own current faculties of will and reason. Okay, so Rumi has a delightful way of expressing this in the poem, Leave the Vulture Behind. And he says this, discursive reason's a vulture, my poor friend. Its wings beat above a decaying corpse. The saint's reason is like the wings of Gabriel. It soars in splendor from stage to stage to rest in the shade of the tree of heaven. It says, I'm a royal hawk. I'm glorious and abundant. I have nothing to do with a corpse. I'm not a vulture. Leave the vulture behind and let me be your guide. Just one of my wings will be of more help to you than 100,000 vultures in full flight. So remember, the vulture is a symbol of reason, discursive reason. And discursive reason is the way that the lower mind uses the intellect like a cutting tool to discursively dissect one thing from another in order to analyze it and understand it. Much like Kierkegaard saying that as soon as you use your intellect, you're working upon a corpse because you have to kill it in order to cut it up. So whatever we're looking at and judging and assessing with our discursive reason has instantly already become a dead thing. That's why the lower self can never reach the fields of the blessed, because the intellect, as the lower self is using it, discursive reasoning, will always look to find what's dead in order to understand it. God is eternally alive. The two can't go together. So in order to go on this journey, my friend, you have to leave the vulture behind. Rumi says that 100,000 vultures cannot compare to one of his wings. What he means is, take 100,000 of your greatest intellects in this world, and what they're spouting as reality does not compare to one of the wings that Rumi can offer you that will take you to the tree of life, beyond the lip of rationality, and of course beyond the level of dead things. You will see the living one. But you first must recognize that there comes the need for the abandoning of discursive logic. This either-or Aristotelian logic doesn't work in the spiritual realm. The spiritual realm is whole, perfect, and complete. It can't be analyzed from the place of dead things. And, just another little touch here. He says that you're a royal hawk. You're glorious and abundant. Have nothing to do with the corpse. So part of this corpse is the image that you have of your lower self. So as we're going on this journey this morning, remember that you're also leaving behind the image of your lower self. Your lower self is associated with all of the dead things that you think make up your world. That's why the spiritual alchemy is going from death to life, from the self-image that you've always identified with to this glorious, golden Christ itself. So there is a losing, a letting go, a rejecting, in order to gain, receive, and unify into something that you truly are. So leave the vulture behind. And in keeping with that idea, remember the vulture is this discursive reasoning. And when we approach our spiritual journey from this place of the lower mind and thinking, within this dualism of the discursive reasoning, we will oftentimes want to adhere to certain spiritual teachings, and we will have an aversion to other spiritual teachings. And if you come to this service, there will probably be a time where you may chafe under some of the teachings that I bring out because they're not familiar. They speak a language that maybe you're not completely on board with or understand. But what we're about to see from Rumi is that there's something unifying to all the different teachings of the world that point towards God. And here we are in the teachings of Islam. And we know in our culture, for the most part, Islam has a really bad rap. And there's a lot of evidence that we can drum up to point to Islam's imperfections and the, how should we say it, harsh worldview that it espouses. Well, maybe you have fallen in love with some of Rumi's teachings over the years, and maybe you know or maybe you don't that Rumi was totally fundamental in his Islamic beliefs. He was a scholar of jurisprudence. He taught everything from the Quran to the Hadith. He was recognized within the regular society of his day in Turkey as one of the greatest exoteric scholars of Islam. So the outer form, if it is not coupled with the inner realization such that Rumi brings, it can often be hijacked and misused. And instead of the successful use of electricity to bring light, it can bring devastation and pain. So Rumi is that unique and vital blending of the exoteric and the esoteric dimensions of his faith. So he has this to say with regard to seeing with this inner vision, this esoteric insight. The prophets are like one single being. If you refuse one of them, you refuse them all. It's like ritual washing. If you don't wash one of your organs and wash all the others, it will be of no use. So as the prophets recognize each other, if you don't admit one of them, it is as if you had admitted none of them. In fact, there's only one light that appears through different windows and which reaches us through the person of each prophet. All of these lights stream from the same sun. If you refuse a part of this light, that shows you're a bat. Hopefully not from Wuhan. That was a joke. Be merry, my friends. You're like a bat who says, I'm against this year's sun, but I accept last year's. In fact, this year's and last year's sun are not different in any way. Whatever difference you think you perceive comes from the fact that you didn't really experience last year's sun. In other words, the light of a certain prophet is your special friend, your special tradition. And if you cling only to that form, then you're not seeing the light that the prophet is a channel or window of. When you're too fixated on form and the letter of the law, you miss the spirit. So this is a really good barometer. If you find your lower mind chafing under certain teachings that are coming from different traditions, it's not to say that you have to accept and embrace all of them uncritically. But if you're deeply listening to what they're saying, Rumi's telling us, you will perceive the light that's coming through them. It may appear in different colors and different patterns. Of course it will. Everybody has a unique fingerprint. So too the prophets. But the light that they're expressing is the same. That's why we have to leave the vulture behind. The discursive intellect seeks to debate and argue and compare and contrast and get into the competitiveness of who's right and who's wrong. The light is beyond right and wrong. That's why we want to soar above the vulture that fixates on dead things and tries to split them apart in the attempt to understand them. To do that, you're as blind as a bat. So maybe you feel this deeper space within the heart starting to open. It's an amazing thing to get out of the head and into the heart. The heart in Sufism is called the garden of truth. So the practice is to journey into the depth of this secret garden. So just continue this pathway, this journey into this golden higher self that resides within the garden of the heart by simply allowing this presence to guide you, the wings of Gabriel, the breath of the All-Merciful. We'll go back to Harvey's compilation of Rumi's poetry in a moment, but I do want to build on what's been said so far by bringing out some of the teachings that come from The Sufi Path of Love by William Chittick. William Chittick is one of the great Sufi scholars, especially with the writings of Ibn Arabi and Rumi. And William Chittick has this to say. According to the Prophet Muhammad, quote, the first thing God created was the capital I intellect. And, quote, the first thing God created was my light, end quote. Chittick goes on. The universal intellect is identical with the Muhammadan light, capital L, which is the spiritual reality of the prophets and saints. So the supreme intellect is the one reality that all saints and all prophets draw from. Everything that is inspired to be transmitted by the prophets and saints comes from the same oceanic intellect, right? But Chittick goes on. He says, not only is this the spiritual reality of prophets and saints, it's also the spiritual reality of human beings when we have reached this station of perfection. So do you see there's really one being, as Rumi said? The saints and prophets are not special and apart from the one being. They're extensions of it. And their only purpose in this world is to woo you, to draw you into your own heart so you can discover the light that they're inspired by and identified with, because it's your light. There's one being. Your discursive intellect will completely dismiss that. In fact, its operation veils that. That's why you cannot get to the ocean of the illumined mind by this lower form of thinking and discursive reasoning. Perfection comes when you're ready to set aside the corpse and rise into your perfection, the surrendering. Now, again, these formulas are well laid out in all these great wisdom traditions. And in Islam, you have this three-part formula that comes from the Hadith of Gabriel, where it says that you go from the stage of Islam to the stage of Iman, and then into the experience of Ihsan. What that means is you enter the path of the grand alchemy by first surrendering Islam. You have to give up your image of your lower self. You have to die to yourself. And then you'll be ready, qualified, initiated into the path of Iman, which means in Arabic, faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. And without faith, says the writer of Hebrews, it's impossible to experience God. So you surrender, and then there's this potential within you that we call Iman, or faith, that begins to reach beyond the reason and the lower intellect. and you begin to ascend the tree. And you begin to experience subtle, unseen spiritual dimensions of yourself, of your being. As we're going to see, you are literally the universe and all things in it. But like Kierkegaard said, again, in his humorous way, it's like we're a mansion and we've consigned ourselves to living in the basement. And we think that the basement is the end-all and be-all of existence. There are so many other rooms to explore in this house of many mansions. But we can only ascend the stairs through this power of Iman, faith, reaching for the unseen, knowing it's there, being assured of it. And when we reach for it, it meets us. That's really what the word picture of grace in Hebrew means. It's hanan. It's this grabbing of the hand from the higher hand. The lower hand is reaching up and getting gripped and being pulled up. So when you reach out in faith, that's your hand reaching into the unseen. You know it's there. You know the power is all merciful. You know that divine grace is real. Even if your lower intellect isn't on board, you're getting rid of the corpse. That's part of the purification. When you reach up, you're met. And then that pulls you into that Ihsan. And this is where Sufism finds its home, in this experience of Ihsan, which is really beauty. It says in this hadith of Gabriel that Ihsan is you are in the state of worshiping God because you know he's directly here. The veils come off, and your heart is lit up by its direct and immediate contact with its beloved source. Your faith leads you to that experience. So Chittick says that this light of God is the inheritance of the prophets, saints, and the human beings who are seeking their own perfection. The universal intellect knows all things, for it is a direct reflection of God's knowledge or gnosis. In other words, it is the hidden treasure at the first stage of its outward manifestation. This is why Rumi and so many other Sufis have said that the whole universe is the outward reflection of man's spiritual reality. Did you catch that? The great supreme intellect, which is your root, it's your natural state, it's your higher image, it's the alchemy of your golden higher self. That's where you really emanate from. That's the first evolute out of the infinite being, is this supreme intellect made in the likeness and image of the all-merciful and supreme. You're a direct expression of this, not a little corpse at the effect level of these bigger forces called nature. We have it all upside down and topsy-turvy. So Rumi and many other Sufis have said that the whole universe is the outward reflection of our spiritual reality. It's our playground. It's the projection of our intellect. In other words, we originated the entire universe. We're the cause of the manifest universe, not the effect. But we're going to see the paradox and how it plays out in this journey from the lower self to the higher self. You know, when you go into Mach, it's like you have to flip the instrumentation. It's like when you go into these higher states beyond the vulture of the lower discursive reason, you're going to encounter paradox because you're actually shifting your existential foundation from being the lower self to being a glorious self. That's why you have to hold all of your judgments, all of your opinions, and all of the supposed knowledge that you've gathered up until now very loosely. Because eventually it will all be contradicted and undone. It will be crutches and helps along the way until you can let it go. But be prepared to let it go at some point. It's not going to take you where you want to go. The universe is a part of human beings, even if human beings appear to be a part of the universe. So again, it's, as Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, we as these lower ego selves are suffering from upside down perception. We think we're a figure within the dream of the universe, when in fact we are dreaming the whole universe. Again, he says in A Course in Miracles, this whole journey that we're talking about is a journey without distance to a place that you've never left, because we have remained, our root, our higher nature has remained in the supreme intellect. We've never left it, but we're asleep. And we're dreaming we're in this world as these bodies. That's why this whole path, this whole journey, is referred to oftentimes as a journey of awakening. You'll awaken to the place you've never left. And just like Dorothy, you'll realize it was all a dream. You're wearing your ruby shoes this morning? You ready to click them? So we're back to Andrew Harvey's translations of Rumi, and this is in keeping with where we are now in the conversation. You are the macrocosm. So if you're not familiar with these terms, microcosm and macrocosm, macrocosm is the big, big cosmos. The microcosm is the little cosmos. And if you've studied any of these kinds of teachings before, you've probably come across that man is a microcosm. He's a miniature, a fractal expression of the great universe. Rumi, in keeping with this esoteric teaching of the Sufis, is flipping this upside-down perception on its head. You're the macrocosm. But notice how he does play with the paradox and massages it so nicely so we could grapple with it and finally understand it. Listen to this. You may seem to be the microcosm. In fact, you are the macrocosm. The branch might seem like the fruit's origin. In fact, the branch exists because of the fruit. So the fruit is, this idea of teleology, like there's an end point, like the acorn has a telos to become an oak tree. It's coded within the acorn to become an oak. So there is this teleological end point to the organic maturation process or growth process or journey of an acorn. And the acorn becomes the oak tree, but the purpose of the oak tree is to produce more acorns. So the end game of the branch is the fruit. The end game of the universe, as we're going to see, is something spectacular. So would the gardener have planted the tree at all without a desire and hope for fruit? That's why the tree is really born from the fruit, even if it seems the fruit is created by the tree. The idea which comes first comes last in realization, particularly that idea which is eternal. So to really tease out what's being said, the universe has a telos, an end point, an omega point. And the omega point is to produce the fruit of awakened spiritual beings, so that they may remember, as the fruit of the universe, that they are the origin of the universe. Just like the fruit, the branch exists because of the fruit. You know, I think we talked about it in Thursday night's class. The caterpillar can't understand any of this. They can't understand that it's going to dissolve and become a completely different creation. But the telos of the caterpillar is the butterfly. It's encoded to become the butterfly. It requires imaginal cells. It requires faith to pull, to first surrender your caterpillarness. You can't get there from being a caterpillar. You actually have to dissolve. Surrender. And then the imaginal cells of faith will become activated. And they carry the code, and they can pull in the energy and the pattern of your higher self, and you can then undergo this alchemy. And in that process, you get so rewired that you begin to think like a different creation. And you'll begin to see life completely different. The earth that was full of lead and dross and suffering actually transforms into gold, flowers. And so this is the journey from seeing yourself as a microcosm to knowing that you're the dreamer of the entire universe. Now, do you see the pressures like we talked about earlier, the struggles, the tribulation that we're going through as a collective species right now? We're reaching a tipping point. Landfills are ridiculous. The climate crisis is probably irreparable at this point. Pandemics galore with constant mutations. I mean, have you seen any of this? 98% of the world's population is living in terrible poverty, mass homelessness, mass evictions within this country, mass unemployment, a capitalist system that has run amok. Political players that are more like prostitutes than they are leaders, trading their influence for favors by big business, Wall Street, and the military-industrial complex. It looks really dim. And if you stay as the microcosm, it's hopeless. And that's the purpose, is to pressure you to will your own transformation. That's why you're here. That's why you're getting this information. Don't kid yourself. It looks so formal and quotidian that you just came to Unity of Stuart, but there's information coming to you. And if you let it in, it will begin to alchemize you in a more rapid rate to reach your telos. And then we're going back to Rumi from this volume of The Sufi Path of Love. And keeping in mind what we had just said, thus, this is Rumi now speaking, thus you may know that the exalted heavens are the reflection of human beings' perceptual faculties. Perception, as Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, makes, or rather projection makes perception. When we were in that supreme state, we projected the universe, and now we're perceiving it. Did not the hand of the majestic God create the first intellect in this sweet ocean? Our forms are running like cups on top of water. Now listen to this. These cups that are running on the stream, on the top of the stream, are the microcosmic beliefs that we have. We're floating on this running water, right, on the surface. So long as they remain empty, they stay on top like basins, but once filled, they sink into the water. Intellect is hidden in a world manifest. Our forms are its waves or drops. The first thought comes last into actuality. Know that such was the foundation of the world in eternity without beginning. And what is this? In the heart's thought, fruits are first. In actuality, in the manifest world, they are the last to become manifest. That's why part of you already knows who you are. You're on a journey to rediscover that. So in your heart, you already have this knowledge of eternity in your higher self. You know it. You're in a process, a journey of actualizing it, bringing it into full manifestation, transforming all of the elements within your being and your character that block it from its full expression. So in the heart's thought, fruits are first. In actuality, they are the last to become manifest. After actualizing the tree by planting it, you will read your first words in the end. Although the branches, leaves, and roots come first, all of these are sent out for the sake of the fruit. This whole path of evolution is to bring you to fruition in your higher self. All these ever-changing forms, all of these prophets that have come and gone and are yet to come over the millennia are all here as gardeners. Right? The Adamic species was first a gardener to till and protect and keep this universe so that the fruit can come. Just know your unbelievable, unfathomable value. Your inestimable worth. This is also part of our upside-down perception. We don't feel worthy. The whole universe and everything in it is there for you to reach your fruition so that you can be the Khalifa, the one who is at the center on the throne as the divinity in nature, the God and the goddess. And what's keeping it from you? This is the path that you have to Sharpen your inner sight, your inner vision to weed out what doesn't belong in your garden of consciousness. What's holding you back from fulfilling your purpose, your mission. Right? Although the branches, leaves, and roots come first, all of these are sent out for the sake of the fruit. Hence the mystery that began as the heaven's seed came in the end, the Lord of but for thee. In Rumi's poetry, but for thee is saying what we've been saying. This whole universe is but for thee. That's why you will be utterly wooed by God when you allow his face to be revealed in your heart. Without holding back, without defending against it, without coming up with clever excuses as to why you can't fully surrender. Once you do, you'll laugh at how you've been hiding and withholding yourself from this oceanic love. You know, Jesus says something very profound in the Course. He says, we are full of anxiety and fear, all of us, as these little microcosms, because we've disassociated from this higher reality. But here's the profound insight he gives. You're not afraid of the higher reality. You're simply afraid of your disassociation from it. It's the act of disassociating, not the reality, that has you anxious and afraid to go home. Your only mission here is to go home in this moment, as a child of the moment. There's no I, there's no self beyond this moment. And what are you making it? Are you making it a path home? Are you making it a defense, a shield, a wall, another god, another idol, another distraction? You're at the helm. You're the dreamer. You're at the level of cause. And just, again, the pressures of the world, as St. Paul said, the whole creation is groaning in travail for the revelation of the sons and daughters of God, so that we bring in this new age and this higher self. And we can literally wipe the world from corrupt leaders and corrupt governments. This is what it will take. Not elections, but inner transformations. Jerry. Does this teaching mean what? Yeah, you could say that. It's like the fruit and the branch. Yeah, you could say that. Well, in truth, it's neither the chicken nor the egg. It's the beloved. So if you're discursively parsing out that there's a distinction fundamentally separate between egg and chicken, then we're still within the lower vision. These are simply illustrations within a language of unveiling, so that the mind can rise into higher spaces that go beyond this either-or dualism. So you'll actually have to leave behind that age-old question in order to truly discover the gnosis, or the knowledge that would answer it once and for all. Yeah, I can see why you would draw this parallel. Sure. And if a tree falls in the forest with no one around, does it make a noise? And the answer, of course, would be no, because there's nobody to hear it. Just like the answer, what comes first before the chicken or the egg, the answer is it's all existing within your discursive logic. That's where that question originates from. When you know it, you'll see it very different. It will be set within the context of gold, and you'll see the face of the beloved in the egg and the chicken. Any other thoughts here? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And to really sort of bring dynamite to what you're saying, I didn't bring it with me. I figured it would be too much to cover this morning. But there's a section in the Risalah, one of these great Sufi texts, where it goes through the process of how God is so far beyond what we can think or imagine. And it's this really long, beautiful quote from Hallaj. And if you know anything about Sufism, Hallaj is the one that experienced his eye becoming the eye of God. And so at the end of all of this pulling away and deconstruction of how the discursive intellect wants to put God in a box, it then ends with a quote from the Quran, I am the hearing one. I am the seeing one. So in other words, even this idea that the one who sees and the one who hears, that's actually God seeing and hearing through your channel. When you give God the glory, you get that experience back to know that he's the only being who sees and hears. And then you're drunk with the wine of divine ecstasy. So there's even no such thing as my eyes or my ears or my seeing. And that really... Excellent. Thank you. A couple of minutes before we send the bag around. Anybody else have thoughts or ideas? Okay, we can pass the bag. And if you're joining us on Facebook, we invite you to go to unityofstuart.org, and there you'll find the donation page. And then please select the 8 a.m. service for your donation, and we greatly appreciate that. Thank you for your support. Ray Joe is waving to you. The Greek word, it means end, or actually perfection. So like when Jesus was on the cross in the Greek New Testament, he says it is complete. He actually uses the word telos. So his entire purpose was fulfilled. So it's just an end point. And we are very grateful for the offering. We charge it with the intention that it brings light and love into this world in whatever forms it needs to take. May we all be blessed and know ourselves as we truly are. And so it is. Amen. Any final thoughts here? Good? All right, let's rise. We can close out with the prayer. And we want to settle within the garden of the heart, open to that sweet presence, the breath of the All-Merciful. And in this opening, the light can come streaming in, and we can give true testimony to the fact that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Well, have a beautiful Sunday, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We wish you all the best. Namaste.
Number one, I got to George, he said to say hello.
Oh, great.
And,
Right back at him.
Yeah. He said he's been up there in Washington. And last week I went, yeah, we know.
Oh.
Yeah. And then I talked to Dave for a long time.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. And I'm still, it's like anything that deviates from the course of the best thing for you is to be with your family. I don't reinforce. Because I
Is
feel
he leaning in that direction?
he's leaning there, but it's a hard decision because I don't want to go into assisted living.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to define that it is a different experience.
Yeah.
And define it as it wouldn't it be wonderful to be with a family member who loves